When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I do not know why I smiled. Maybe my heart did not know what else to do. She stood near the doorway, her arms folded, her voice calm and steady, like she was reading a list. She said, "You should pack your things. This house needs peace now." I nodded slowly, like I understood. But inside, something broke very quietly. Not loudly. Not in a way that anyone could hear. I looked around the living room. The same room where I once rocked my son to sleep. The same room where I laughed during birthdays and wiped tears during hard days. That room no longer felt like it belonged to me. My son was sitting on the sofa. He did not look at me. His eyes stayed on the floor, like something important was written there. I waited for him to say something. Even one word would have been enough. But the room stayed silent. I picked up my keys from the table. They made a small sound when they touched my palm. That sound stayed with me longer than her words. I walked out without saying goodbye. I did not want them to remember me as someone who begged. That night, I slept in a small rented room with white walls and no photos. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself the same question again and again. How did I become a guest in the home I built? Let me take you back. Back to a time when this story was not heavy. Back to when love felt simple. I am a mother of one son. Just one. He was my whole world from the day he was born. His father passed away when my son was still young, and from that day, life became very quiet for me. I worked small jobs. I cooked simple meals. I saved every coin. Everything I did was for my son. I remember his school uniform. Always a little too big, because I wanted it to last longer. I remember tying his shoelaces every morning and telling him to walk carefully. Our house was small, but it was warm. Not because of money, because of love. When he grew older, I told him he must marry someone kind. Someone who would sit with him when life felt heavy. Someone who would not walk away when times became hard. When he told me he was getting married, I was happy. Truly happy. I prayed for his future every night. The day I met my daughter-in-law, she smiled politely. Her smile did not reach her eyes, but I ignored that. I told myself not to judge. Everyone takes time. After the wedding, they moved into the house with me. It felt natural. This was our family home. I thought we would live like one family. At first, everything was quiet and respectful. She cooked her own meals. I cooked mine. We spoke gently. I tried not to interfere. I reminded myself many times, he is married now. Give him space. But slowly, the air began to change. It started with little things. Things that felt too small to mention. The television would be switched off when I was watching. The kitchen shelves were rearranged without telling me. My favorite cup disappeared one day, and I never saw it again. When I asked gently, she would say, I needed space. So I gave space. I stayed in my room more. I spoke less. I learned to move quietly, like someone passing through. My son stopped eating dinner with me. He ate later. Or earlier. Or not at all. I told myself, this is normal. Families change. But some nights, I sat alone at the dining table, listening to the clock. Each tick felt louder than the last. I missed noise. I missed laughter. I missed being needed. The silence grows. One evening, I heard them arguing in their room. Not loudly. Just enough for me to know something was wrong. I heard my name. My heart started beating fast. I did not want to listen, but the walls were thin. She interferes, my daughter-in-law said. She makes everything uncomfortable. I sat on my bed, holding my hands together. I searched my memory. What had I done? I had not raised my voice. I had not given advice unless asked. I had not complained. That night, I did not sleep. The next morning, my son avoided my eyes. I wanted to ask him, are you okay? But the words stayed inside my throat. I was afraid of the answers. I tried harder after that. I woke up earlier. I cleaned quietly. I cooked food and left it on the stove without asking anyone to eat. Sometimes she would say, you don't have to do that. Her voice was not unkind. But it was distant. I felt like I was fading. Like a shadow in my own home. One day, I overheard her on the phone. She said, I never wanted to live with a mother-in-law. That sentence stayed with me all day. I carried it from room to room. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. My hair had more gray than before. My eyes looked tired. I whispered, When did I become a problem? I wanted to talk to my son. I really did. One evening, I waited until he was alone. I sat across from him. I said softly, "Are you happy?" He paused. Then he nodded. I wanted to ask more, but I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of me. Fear of choosing sides. So I smiled and said nothing else. That was my mistake. Weeks passed. Then months. I felt like a guest who stayed too long. I kept my belongings packed neatly, like I might leave any day. The house did not feel like mine anymore. It felt borrowed. One afternoon, my daughter-in-law asked me to talk. Her voice was calm. She said, "We need our own space. For our marriage." I nodded again. I had nodded so much by then, it felt natural. I did not argue. I did not cry. But that night, my chest hurt in a way I had never felt before. The final day came quietly. No shouting. No drama. Just a sentence spoken in a normal voice. "You are no longer welcome here." She did not say it with anger. That was what hurt the most. And that is where I began. After that conversation, nothing felt the same. The house still looked the same, but the air inside it felt heavier. Every step I took sounded louder to me, even when I walked slowly. I became very careful. Careful with my words. Careful with my movements. Careful with my feelings. I started waking up before sunrise. Not because I needed to, but because it felt safer to be awake before everyone else. The early morning hours were quiet. They did not judge me. I would sit in the kitchen with a cup of tea, watching the light slowly enter through the window. Those moments felt like borrowed peace. When my daughter-in-law woke up, I made sure I was already done. The kitchen clean. No dishes in the sink. No smell of cooking. I did not want to give her any reason to feel uncomfortable. Small words, big weight. One morning, she said, "You should not wait for us for meals." Her voice was polite. But the message stayed with me all day. So I stopped waiting. I ate alone in my room. Sometimes I did not feel hungry at all. Sometimes I forced myself to eat because I knew I had to. My son noticed once. He asked, "Why don't you eat with us anymore?" I smiled and said, "I eat earlier. It's easier for me." That was not the full truth. But it was easier than explaining the ache in my chest. There were days when no one spoke to me at all. Not because they were angry, but because I was no longer part of their routine. I felt invisible. I watched them plan things without me. Weekend outings. Family visits. Small joys. I told myself, this is their life now. I tried to accept it. But acceptance does not come easily when you still love deeply. I wanted to talk to my son many times. I practiced words in my head. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to cause problems. I just want peace. But every time I looked at him, I saw how tired he was. I saw how pulled he felt. So I stayed silent. Silence felt like protection. But slowly, it became a wall. One afternoon, I returned from the market with vegetables. I had always done the shopping. It made me feel useful. My daughter-in-law looked at the bags and said, "You don't have to buy things for us anymore." Her words were calm, but they cut deeply. I nodded and quietly took the bags back to my room. That night, I cried for the first time in many months. Not loudly, just tears falling into my pillow. I was not angry. I was tired. I remembered the days when my son would run to the door when I came home. When he would tell me everything about his day. When I was his safe place. Now, I felt like a problem he did not know how to solve. I did not blame him. That is important to say. Love can exist with disappointment. I learned that the hard way. Sometimes I felt watched. Not in a cruel way. But like every movement mattered. If I stayed in the living room too long, I felt out of place. If I stayed in my room, I felt forgotten. There was no right place for me anymore. One evening, I heard my daughter-in-law say, "This situation is affecting our marriage." That sentence stayed unfinished in my mind. Was I the situation? I wanted to ask. But I was afraid of the answer. A failed attempt. One night, I cooked my son's favorite meal. I had not cooked for him in a long time. I placed the plate on the table and said softly, "I made this for you." He smiled, but it looked forced. He said, "You didn't have to." I said, "I wanted to." He ate quietly. We did not talk much. After dinner, my daughter-in-law cleaned the kitchen without looking at me. That was the last time I cooked for him. Guilt without crime. I started feeling guilty for things I had not done. For existing. For being old. For being alone. I questioned myself constantly. Was I too quiet? Was I too present? Was I too much? The questions never stopped. The distance between us. My son became distant in a way that hurt more than anger would have. He was polite. Respectful. But distant. I wanted to hug him. But I was afraid he would pull away. So I kept my hands to myself. Their bedroom door stayed closed more often. I stopped knocking. I felt like a stranger in the hallway. Sometimes I stood by the window and watched people outside. Families walking. Mothers holding hands with children. I wondered when my role had ended. The question I never asked. One night, I sat on my bed and whispered, "If I leave, would anyone miss me?" The silence answered me. The tension was not loud. That made it worse. No shouting. No accusations. Just a quiet pus. A slow removal. I felt myself being erased, piece by piece. I kept hoping something would change. That my son would speak up. That my daughter-in-law would soften. Hope can be dangerous when it stays too long. The day before everything ended, my daughter-in-law cleaned out a cupboard. She placed my things in a small box. She said, "These were taking space." I held the box in my hands. It was light. Too light for a lifetime. That night, I knew something was coming. I just did not know how quietly it would arrive. The morning it happened, the house was unusually quiet. Not the normal quiet. This was a waiting quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I woke up before dawn, as I had been doing for months. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, listening. No voices. No movement. I remember thinking that something felt final. I washed my face slowly and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked older than I felt inside. I touched my hair and sighed. I did not know that this would be my last morning in that house. The invitation to talk. Around mid-morning, my daughter-in-law knocked on my door. She did not wait for me to answer before opening it slightly. She said, "We need to talk." Her voice was calm. Almost gentle. I nodded and followed her to the living room. My son was already there. He sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped together. He looked nervous. I stood for a moment, unsure where to sit. Then I sat on the chair near the door. That should have told me something. The words that changed everything. She did not waste time. She said, "This living arrangement is not working anymore." I nodded. I had been nodding for a long time. She continued, "We need our own space. For our marriage. For our peace." I looked at my son. He did not look back. Then she said the words I was not ready for. "You are no longer welcome here." She said it without anger. Without raising her voice. That calmness made it hurt more. For a moment, I felt nothing. Not sadness. Not shock. Just emptiness. The moment of realization. I waited for my son to speak. Seconds passed. Then minutes. He cleared his throat and said quietly, "Emmy, this is best for everyone." That was it. No explanation. No comfort. Just that sentence. In that moment, I understood something very clearly. This decision had already been made. Long before this conversation. Holding my dignity. I took a deep breath. I did not cry. I did not shout. I said, "Okay." Just one word. That word tasted bitter in my mouth. I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak, but I did not let it show. I said, "I will pack my things." My daughter-in-law nodded. My son stayed silent. Packing a life. I went back to my room and closed the door. That room had been mine for many years. Now it felt borrowed. I opened the cupboard and looked at my clothes. So simple. So few. I packed slowly. Each item held a memory. A shawl my son bought me years ago. A photo from his school days. A small notebook where I wrote prayers. I placed them carefully in my bag. My hands did not shake. My heart did. The door that never opened. As I packed, I hoped my son would come in. That he would say something. Anything. But the door stayed closed. That silence said more than words ever could. Leaving without goodbye. When I was done, I picked up my bag. It was light. Too light for a lifetime. I walked into the hallway. My daughter-in-law stood there. She said, "Take care." I nodded. My son stood near the window. I waited. He did not turn around. So I did not say goodbye. I walked out of the house quietly. The sound of the door. The door closed behind me. It was a soft sound, but it echoed inside me. I stood outside for a moment, holding my bag, not knowing where to go. The house looked the same from outside, but it no longer belonged to me. The first night alone. I rented a small room nearby. White walls. A single bed. I placed my bag on the floor and sat on the bed. That was when the tears came. Not loud. Not heavy. Just steady. I cried for my son. For the years I gave. For the love that had no place anymore. Questions with no answers. That night, I did not sleep. I asked myself many questions. Did I fail as a mother? Did I hold on too long? Did I not know when to step back? The questions stayed with me. A letter I never sent. The next morning, I wrote a letter to my son. I wrote, I never wanted to stand in your way. I only wanted to stand beside you. I folded the letter. I did not send it. Some words are too heavy to carry. The world moves on. Days passed. The world did not stop. People walked. Cars passed. Life continued. But inside me, something had changed forever. I felt like a door had closed inside my heart. I slowly began to understand something. Love does not always protect you. Sometimes, it asks you to leave quietly. That truth hurt. But it was real. That day was not just about leaving a house. It was about losing a place in someone's life. And realizing that I had to learn how to live without it. The first few days after I left felt unreal. Like I was walking through someone else's life. I woke up every morning in that small rented room and forgot, for a few seconds, where I was. Then I remembered. The white walls. The silence. The space where no one waited for me. I learned very quickly that grief does not always scream. Sometimes it sits quietly beside you, like an old friend you did not invite. Learning to breathe again. I made myself a routine. Not because I wanted one, but because I needed something steady. I woke up early. I made tea. I opened the window. I watched the street below. People going to work. Children walking with school bags. Life was moving. So I told myself I must move too. Some days were harder than others. Some days I stayed in bed longer. Some days I talked to myself just to hear a voice. I did not feel angry. That surprised me. I felt tired. And sad. And very old. A quiet kind of strength. One afternoon, I went to a nearby park. I sat on a bench and watched the trees. The wind moved the leaves gently. No force. No struggle. I thought about that. I had spent so long trying not to disturb anyone. Trying to be small. Trying to fit into a space that was no longer mine. And still, I was asked to leave. That day, something inside me shifted. Not in a dramatic way, but quietly. I realized I did not need permission to exist. I began to remember parts of myself I had forgotten. I liked walking in the morning. I liked reading old books. I liked listening to soft music. These were small things, but they were mine. I cooked meals for myself again. Simple food. Warm food. For the first time in a long time, I ate without feeling watched. One evening, my phone rang. It was my son. My heart stopped for a moment before it started again. I answered slowly. He said, "Emmy, how are you?" I closed my eyes. I wanted to say many things. But I said, "I am okay." That was partly true. He paused. Then he said, "I hope you are not upset." I smiled sadly. I said, "I hope you are happy." That was the truth. We did not talk long. But when the call ended, I felt something loosen inside me. Days later, I thought a lot about forgiveness. Not the kind that comes after apologies, but the kind you give yourself. I realized something important. Holding pain does not punish anyone else. It only makes your own heart heavier. So I chose to forgive. Not because they asked, but because I needed peace. I packed the last few things from my bag and placed them neatly in the cupboard. That small action felt important. It meant I was staying, not waiting to return. I stopped checking my phone so often. I stopped waiting for footsteps that would never come. Letting go did not happen all at once. It happened slowly, one breath at a time. A new kind of home. Over time, the room began to feel warmer. Not because it changed, but because I did. I hung one photo on the wall. Just one. Not from the past, but a picture of a sunrise I took myself. It reminded me that beginnings can happen at any age. Months later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it slowly. My son stood there. He looked tired. Older. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then he said, "May I come in?" I stepped aside. He sat down and looked around the room. He said, "You've settled." I nodded. He hesitated. Then he said quietly, "I'm sorry." That was all. No long speech. No excuses. Just those two words. I felt tears rise, but I did not cry. I said, "I know." We sat in silence. This time, it did not hurt. A different kind of love. Our relationship changed after that. We did not go back to how things were. And that was okay. We spoke sometimes. Visited sometimes. I did not push. I did not pull. Love, I learned, does not always mean closeness. Sometimes it means respect from a distance. The lesson I learned. If I could speak to my younger self, I would say this. Do not lose yourself while trying to hold others. Do not shrink to make someone else comfortable. And never believe your worth depends on being needed. Homes are not just walls. They are places where you are allowed to breathe. If you are ever asked to leave quietly, walk out with your head high. Because dignity stays with you, even when everything else is taken away. Today, I sit by my window with a cup of tea. The sun is setting. I am alone. But I am not empty. I still love my son. That will never change. But I have learned to love myself too. And that is where my new home begins.